So finally, we are going to talk about the third category of principles which govern how the economy works as a whole. Now, there are three different principles under this category, and we're going to be talking about the first one, which is about a country's standard of living, and what does it depend on. So, if you've traveled outside the United States or even within the United States, you may have seen that there is a huge variation in living standards. In fact, in San Francisco, we don't even have to go that far. We have, these multi-million-dollar condos, and we have people living in them, and we have people who are homeless. And this type of a dichotomy exists within a city, within many cities in the United States, but there are also variations when we look at urban versus rural areas. But when we think about countries, and this is what this principle is about, when we're talking about different countries, there is huge variation in living standards around the world. And also across time. If you've traveled to Mexico or maybe another developing country, you might be able to see that there are quite or substantial differences between living standards. So you could have, high income countries, and these are countries like Germany, the United States, Canada, and you could have low income countries. Low income countries are countries like Sudan, Nigeria, Indonesia, etc. So when we talk about high income versus low income, we're really talking about in dollar figures or in any other currency what an average German might make relative to an average Indonesian. Okay, so there are these variations that that are there, and these incomes get the differences in these incomes get translated into the variations that exist in access to goods and services. So you could imagine that high income countries have better access to nutrition or food, better health care. We don't know about the United States, but for other countries, if we're comparing the United Kingdom to a country like Indonesia, of course the United Kingdom has better healthcare. And also, if you're a higher income country, you might experience, or your population or the people may have longer life expectancy than citizens of low income countries. So over time, there are changes in living standards. If a country was poor, doesn't mean it's going to be poor or a low income country forever. If there are right investments in education, in healthcare, etc., a country can get out of their poverty trap. Okay, so the next thing we want to think about in this principle is what determines a country's living standard. Okay, so living standard can be characterized by all of these things that I've mentioned, income being one of the driving factors, but we want to understand what explains these large differences in living standards among countries and over time. The answer is pretty simple. Almost all of the variation that you see in living standards is attributable to the biggest determinant across countries, which is productivity. This is the single most important factor that affects why there is a large variation in living standards around the world. Okay, so by productivity, we mean that, or by productivity is defined as the amount of goods and services produced per person. Okay, so any nation where workers can produce a large quantity of goods and services, most people would enjoy a higher standard of living. And in countries or nations where workers are less productive, they would have less access to resources. So similarly, the growth rate of a country's productivity determines the growth rates of its average incomes. Now, while the relationship between productivity and living standards is primary, there are other explanations for why living standards can vary, but they don't explain all of the variation. The biggest determinant still is productivity. There are other factors like the existence of labor unions, which have died in the United States for many, many years. There's also competition from abroad that can affect living standards by making producers produce more innovative goods and services. But the relationship between productivity and living standards also has profound implications for public policy. When thinking about how any policy will affect living standards, the key question is how it will affect our ability to produce goods and services. So in order to boost living standards, policymakers need to raise productivity by ensuring that workers are well educated, have the training and the tools they need to produce goods and services, and have access to better available technology. So maybe we can use our natural resources in a better way, or we can use our education in a better way.